in the quiet, picturesque village of Cedar Brook, nestled in a valley of the Blue Ridge Mountains. The changing seasons painted the world in strokes of gold, green and crisp white. Life moved at the pace of baking bread and growing corn. Everyone knew everyone, and stories were a currency more valued than coin. The most beloved storykeeper was an elderly woman named Eleanor. To all, she was Granny Ellie, a title worn like a medal of honor, earned through decades of kindness. Her legendary peach cobbler and hands that could soothe a fevered brow or coax life from the stubbornest soil. At 78, Eleanor's hair was a cloud of silver, forever escaping the bun at her nape. Her eyes, the color of faded denim, still held a lively sparkle, though a careful observer might note a deep, perpetual weariness in their depths. Her hands were a map of her life, gentle, capable, etched with lines from gardening, knitting and kneading dough, scarred from old burns and nicks earned in a lifetime of tending. But beneath the warm, flower-dusted apron and behind the sweet smile she reserved for the children who visited for cookies, lived a secret terror. A shadow clung to the edges of her sunlit kitchen, a darkness born not of the ancient forests surrounding the village, but of the man who shared her roof, her stepson, Michael. Eleanor's story had not begun in shadow. She had married young and joyfully to a gentle carpenter named Walter. His love was as solid and reliable as the oak he worked with. He would come home from his workshop smelling of sawdust and pine, his pockets often filled with wildflowers or a piece of river smoothed glass for her collection. Their greatest joy was their son, Benjamin. Ben was his father's shadow in the workshop and his mother's helper in the garden, growing into a strong, kind man with his father's steady hands and his mother's thoughtful eyes. Tragedy, when it came, was swift and brutal. A logging accident on a neighbor's farm took Benjamin at 25, leaving a crater of grief in their world. He left behind a young wife, Sarah, and a 2-year-old son, Michael. Walter, shattered but anchored by a profound sense of duty, did his best to hold the remnants of his family together. Sarah, lost in her own sorrow, moved away a few years later to her family in another state, leaving young Michael in Walter's care. A few years after that, seeking companionship and a mother for the boy, Walter married Clara, a widow from the next county. Clara was a stern, practical woman, wounded by her own losses, and she brought a strict, loveless order to the household. She passed from pneumonia a decade ago, but Michael remained, now a man of 45, living in the old family farmhouse with Walter and Eleanor. Walter, at 82, was still the heart of the home. His workshop still produced beautiful, hand-turned bowls and rocking chairs he sold at the Cedar Brook Farmers Market. His presence was Eleanor's anchor, a quiet, steadfast force that kept the world in balance. But Walter had a tradition. Every week, he journeyed to the larger town of Millhaven, an hour's drive through winding mountain roads, to sell his wares, purchase supplies, and visit with old friends. These trips often lasted from dawn until well after dusk, and sometimes, if winter weather threatened or a friend persuaded him to stay over, he would be gone for a night. It was in the echoing silence, after his truck rumbled down the gravel drive, that the shadow in the house would stir and stretch. The resentment in Michael had festered for decades. As a boy, he felt perpetually out of place. He was not Eleanor's blood. Benjamin's ghost, though never maliciously invoked, was a constant golden presence. Walter tried his best, teaching him woodwork, taking him fishing, but his own grief was a wall Michael couldn't scale. Eleanor, drowning in the loss of her own child, struggled to connect with the sullen, confused boy who was a living reminder of her son's absence. Her attempts felt forced to him. His withdrawal felt like rejection to her. He grew into a brooding, entitled man. A series of failed jobs at the sawmill, the auto shop, the hardware store ended with him blaming lazy bosses or conniving coworkers. He now spent his days tinkering pointlessly in the barn or down at the hollow log, the village tavern, nursing a grudge and a bottle of cheap whiskeys. His temper was a match waiting for fuel. The first violent incident occurred on a bleak November afternoon 5 years ago. A cold rain lashed the windows. Walter had left for Millhaven to fetch specialty varnish. Eleanor was in her sanctuary, the kitchen, stirring a pot of simmering vegetable soup, the steam fogging the panes. The back door slammed. Michael stumbled in, the smell of rain and stale beer clinging to him. "Where's Dad's cash box?" He slurred, his eyes glassy. Eleanor kept her voice even, her back to him. "You know Walter handles the money, Michael. It's with him." "Don't lie to me," he snarled, stepping closer. The menace in his voice was new, a cold snake slithering into her warm kitchen. "You've always hoarded everything for yourself. You never wanted me here." She turned slowly, meeting his bloodshot gaze. "That's not true." "This is your home." "My home?" He let out a harsh, mocking laugh and slammed his fist on the heavy oak table. The salt cellar jumped and clattered. "You let me live here." There's a difference. In 2 strides, he was upon her, his fingers digging like iron bolts into the flesh of her upper arm. He yanked her away from the stove. "You think I don't see it? The way you look at me, like I'm something that tracked mud on your clean floor?" "Michael, let go!" she cried, panic rising. He didn't. Instead, he shoved her backwards. Her hip caught the edge of the counter, a sharp bloom of pain. She lost her balance, her flailing arm catching the handle of the soup pot. It crashed to the floor, a tidal wave of scalding liquid and shattered vegetables. Eleanor screamed as the hot broth soaked through her stockings, searing her ankle. Through a haze of pain and steam, she saw his hand draw back. The slap, when it came, was a shocking, bright explosion of sound and light. Her head snapped to the side, the taste of copper flooding her mouth. She crumpled to her knees amidst the wreckage of the soup, ceramic shards biting into her skin. She clutched her throbbing cheek, tears mingling with the steam on her face. "Why?" she choked out, the word barely a whisper. His shadow loomed over her. "Because you need to remember your place," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. Then he was gone, stomping upstairs, leaving her amidst the ruin. That evening, when Walter's headlights cut through the rainy dark, Eleanor had cleaned every trace. The floor was spotless. A new pot of soup, slightly less perfect, simmered. She wore a shin-ecked blouse and a thick shawl. And when he asked about her limp, she smiled wanly and said she'd slipped on the wet porch steps. The lie tasted bitter, but the thought of telling him, of seeing the pain and conflict in his kind eyes, of potentially destroying the fragile family he'd tried so hard to preserve, was unimaginable. She swallowed the truth, and with it, a piece of her own spirit. It was the beginning of a terrible, secret ritual. The beatings became a dreadful pattern, always timed to Walter's absences. The triggers were varied and unpredictable. A comment he perceived as disrespectful, the last piece of pie the wrong way she looked at him, or simply the suffocating weight of his own failures, which he needed to offload onto someone weaker. The locations changed, the kitchen, the dusty parlor, the back porch. The outcome was always the same: pain, shame, and a frantic cleanup before Walter's return. One particularly vicious attack happened in the heart of summer. Walter had left at dawn for a craft fair 2 towns over, promising to bring back a new set of knitting needles he'd whittled for her. Eleanor sought solace in her garden. her true haven. It was a riot of color and life. Heirloom tomatoes heavy on the vine, sunflowers standing like cheerful sentinels, and the roses she and Benjamin had planted so many years ago, now climbing wildly over the old trellis. She was on her knees, weeding around the lettuce, humming an old hymn when she felt his presence. Michael stood on the back porch, silhouetted against the screen door, a dark cutout against the bright day. He had been rejected for a job at the neighboring orchard that morning. She could feel the rage radiating from him like heat from asphalt. "Enjoying yourself?" His voice was a low growl that carried across the yard. She sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her brow with a gloved hand. "It's a good day for weeding, Michael. The soil is soft." "A good day," he repeated, stepping off the porch and starting down the gravel path. "You have a good day puttering in the dirt while I get treated like trash. Must be nice." A familiar dread coiled in her stomach. "Let's not do this today. Please." "Let's not do what?" He was closer now, his face mottled with anger. "Let's not point out that you live in my father's house eating his food. Well, I can't even get a job bagging apples? It's our home," she said softly, beginning to stand. He moved with shocking speed. His fist wasn't aimed at her face this time. It drove into her side, just below the ribs. A sickening, breath-stealing punch. The air left her lungs in a silent whoosh. She folded over, gasping, falling sideways into the soft loam of the carrot bed. "You and your perfect, dead son." He screamed, the dam of his fury breaking. A kick landed on her thigh, a white-hot burst of pain. Another caught her shoulder as she tried to roll away. She curled into a fetal position, arms over her head, her face pressed into the earth that smelled of life and growth. His boots connected with her back, her legs. She stopped crying, stopped pleading. She retreated inside herself to a small, silent place where the pain was a distant thunder. She focused on the scent of lavender crushed beneath her, on the distant buds of a bumblebee, on the memory of Benjamin's laugh in this very garden. When his rage was spent, he stood over her, panting. "Stay out of my way," he spat, then turned and stalked back to the house. Eleanor lay still for a long time, the sun beating down on her bruised body. Slowly, agonizingly, she pushed herself up. Her dress was stained with dirt and green sap. She gathered her scattered gardening tools with trembling hands. Back in the house, she heard the clink of a bottle from the living room. She limped to the downstairs bathroom, locked the door, and assessed the damage in the mirror. A livid bruise was already flowering on her ribcage. Her arms were scraped and muddy. Using comfrey and arnica from her own herb patch, she made poultices. She moved like an automaton, her soul numb. That night, she told Walter she'd had a dizzy spell and fallen in the garden. He fussed over her, made her tea, and his genuine concern was a sharper pain than any of Michael's blows. The secret carved her hollow. The vibrant Granny Ellie the village knew began to dim. She declined invitation to the weekly quilting circle. Her steps at the annual harvest festival were slower, more careful. She developed a slight, permanent stoop, which the villagers attributed to age. "Father Time is catching up to dear Ellie," they'd sigh sympathetically. But one person saw more. A young woman named Chloe, who worked at the local library and helped elderly villagers with errands, had become fond of Eleanor. She admired her quiet wisdom and the way her cookies were always warm, as if she had a sixth sense for when a lonely heart might stop by. One afternoon, helping Eleanor shelve jars of canned peaches in the cellar, Chloe saw the edge of a purple, yellow bruise peeking from the cuff of Eleanor's cardigan. It was in the shape of fingers. "Granny Ellie," Chloe said, her voice gentle but firm. "How did you really get that?" Eleanor's hand flew to her sleeve, pulling it down swiftly. A mask of pleasant calm slipped over her face, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, you know how it is, dear. My skin is like tissue paper these days. I bump into the cabinet and look like I've been in a prize fight." Chloe held her gaze, the unsaid words hanging thick in the cool cellar air. "If you ever need to talk or need any kind of help, my door is always open, day or night." Eleanor's composure wavered for a fraction of a second, a crack in the fortress wall. She patted Chloe's hand. "You're a good girl. Thank you." But she said no more. The fear was too great. Fear of Michael's retaliation, fear of Walter's heartbreak, fear of the scandal, fear that no one would believe her. So she endured. As a silent testament, she began to keep a journal. In a small leather-bound book with frail, onion-skin pages, she documented the truth. She hid it beneath a loose floorboard under her woolen rug. The entries were not daily. Only after the bad days they were stark, factual, and heartbreaking. October 12th. Walter. "Gone to Millhaven for supplies," M demanded. "Money for truck part." I said none. Backhand to face. Lip split on my tooth. Told Walter I bit it eating toast. February 3rd. Cold. He was drinking. Said the stew was bland. Threw the bowl. Pushed me into pantry door. Shoulder very sore. Hard to knit. June 18th. In the garden again. Over the weeding. Kicked. Bruises on legs. Used arnica. I miss Ben so much today. The roses are blooming. The journal became her confidant, the only place where the shadow was named and given form. One day, she wrote in a shaky script after a particularly harrowing entry. "This book will speak for me when my voice cannot." The crisis point arrived on a perfect, crisp Saturday in October 2025. The maple trees lining the driveway were fiery torches of red and orange. Walter, looking excited, announced his old Air Force buddy from Atlanta had invited him down for a long overdue visit. They planned to go to a baseball game, work on a classic car in his friend's garage. He would be gone for 3 days. 3 days. The words echoed in Eleanor's skull like a death knell. She felt the blood drain from her face, but she forced her brightest smile. She packed his bag with extra socks, tucked in a note reminding him to take his arthritis medicine, and kissed him goodbye at the door, her hand lingering on his weathered cheek. She watched his old pickup truck until it vanished around the bend, a cold dread settling in her bones. The harassment began within the hour. Michael, emboldened by the unprecedented length of his father's absence, was like a shark in a pond. He criticized her cooking, complained about the noise of her knitting needles, and paced the house like a caged animal. The first evening, as dusk painted the sky in lavender and gray, he confronted her in the living room. The TV was off. The only light came from a single lamp. "I need $200, he stated, standing between her and the hallway to her bedroom. "Michael, you heard your father. He took the budget for his trip. There's only the household cash for groceries for the week, and it's locked in the strongbox." "Get it," he said, his voice dangerously flat. "I don't have the key. Walter has it." "You're a lying old bitch," he roared, the switch flipping from cold to incandescent in an instant. He closed the distance in 2 strides. His hand shot out, grabbing the collar of her house dress, twisting the fabric tight against her throat. He shook her violently. "Everything in this house is mine by rights. You're just the freeloader." He slapped her, the sound explosive in the quiet room. Before she could even gasp, a fist drove into her stomach, driving the air from her lungs in a sickening rush. She collapsed to the braided rug, wheezing, tears of shock and agony blurring her vision. He stood over her, and then the kicks began. They were methodical, brutal, aimed at her ribs, her back, her legs. Each impact was a burst of white fire. She tried to crawl away towards the fireplace hearth, but he followed. She could hear him grunting with the effort. The world narrowed to the pattern of the rug, the smell of wood smoke in the hearth, and the all-consuming pain. This is it. A strangely calm voice spoke in her mind. He's going to kill me this time. As her vision began to tunnel, a sound pierced the haze of her agony. A knock at the front door. Then another, more insistent. Michael froze, his foot raised for another blow. They both looked toward the door. Granny Ellie, it's Chloe. I brought you that book on mountain wildflowers you wanted. The cheerful voice from the porch was a lifeline thrown into hell. In Cedar Brook, doors were rarely locked during the day. The knob turned. Hello, Ellie? Michael panicked. With a final venomous look at Eleanorna, he turned and fled through the kitchen, out the back door, into the night. The front door swung open. Chloe's cheerful smile died instantly, replaced by sheer horror. The scene before her was one from a nightmare. The beloved grandmother of the village, curled and broken on the floor, her face a mask of swelling and blood, her dress torn. Oh my God, Ellie! Chloe dropped the book and sprinted across the room, sliding to her knees. She touched Eleanor's shoulder gently. Ellie, can you hear me? It's Chloe. Eleanor's one eye that wasn't swollen shut fluttered open. A strangled, wet sound came from her throat. She tried to speak, but only a whimper emerged. She raised a trembling, bruised hand and clutched Chloe's wrist with surprising strength. Help me, she rasped, the two words containing a lifetime of silent suffering. Chloe didn't hesitate. She called 911 first, then the local sheriff, a man named Roy Briggs who had known Walter and Ellie for 40 years. She called the village doctor, old Doc Murphy. Then she ran to the kitchen, wet a clean dish towel with cool water, and returned to cradle Eleanor's head, dabbing gently at her face, whispering, "It's okay. You're safe now. Help is coming." The response was swift. Sheriff Briggs, his face grim, found Michael down at the hollow log, already on his third whiskey, trying to craft an alibi. The damning evidence was all over Eleanor, and when Chloe, with Eleanor's weak nod of consent, guided the sheriff to the loose floorboard, the journal provided a 5-year record of hell. The stark, dated entries were more powerful than any testimony. Walter was called in Atlanta. He drove through the night, a 9-hour journey of pure terror. He arrived at the small regional hospital at dawn, his face ashen. When he was led into the room where Eleanor lay, swathed in bandages, her face a map of purple and yellow, connected to monitors, he let out a sound like a wounded animal. He stumbled to her bedside, collapsing into the chair, and took her unbruised hand in both of his, pressing it to his lips. Tears streamed down his deeply lined face, dripping onto their clasped hands. Eleanor, my sweet Eleanor. Why? He wept, his voice cracking. Why didn't you tell me? She turned her head slowly, painfully, to look at him. The love and devastation in his eyes finally broke the last of her walls. The decades of fear melted, leaving only sorrow and truth. I was afraid, she whispered, her voice raw. Afraid for your heart. Afraid you wouldn't believe me. Afraid of breaking our family. He's Clara's son. He's all you had left of them. Walter shook his head, a storm of grief and anger in his eyes. You are my family. You are my heart. He's a sick man who made monstrous choices. I would have believed you. I should have seen the guilt would haunt him, a companion to her pain for the rest of his days. The village of Cedar Brook was rocked to its core. Whispers of, I thought something wasn't right, and poor Ellie, gave way to a powerful communal embrace. Casseroles and flowers flooded the porch. The quilting circle made her a special, beautiful blanket for healing. Offers to sit with her to help Walter to tend the garden came daily. The shadow had been dragged into the light, and the community rallied to burn it away. Michael was charged with aggravated assault, domestic battery, and elder abuse. The journal was a key piece of evidence. He would face significant prison time, a fact that brought Walter and Eleanor no joy, only a grim, necessary relief. The recovery was slow. Physical wounds healed, though her ribs ached in the cold. The deeper psychic scars would always be there, tender spots on her soul. But with Walter's unwavering devotion at her side, he refused any trip that would take him away overnight, ever again, and the steady support of friends. Like Chloe in the wider village, Eleanor began to reclaim her life. She sat in her garden again the following spring, Walter beside her in a matching rocking chair. The roses, pruned and cared for, burst forth in a triumphant cascade of crimson and pink. The scent of lilac and turned earth filled the air. She still knit scarves for the winter charity drive. Her peach cobbler still won a blue ribbon at the county fair. Her story, in hushed and respectful tones, became a new kind of legend in Cedar Brook, not one of simple hardship, but of profound, secret courage and the critical importance of speaking out against hidden darkness. It changed the village, making people look closer, ask kinder questions, and listen more carefully to the silences between words. And Granny Ellie, though her hair was perhaps a little whiter and her steps a little more careful, found that peace, once a distant memory, could take root again. It grew alongside her in the rich, forgiving soil of her garden and in the warm, safe sunlight of a home where the shadows, at long last, had been banished.